Hey everybody, Rock Guy here doing our first album review for 2022. Reviewing an album that came out in 2021, Blisskrieg's Remedy. So I've been pretty excited about this album for a long time, featuring the original lineups of both Days of the New and Tantric. And as a big Todd Whitener fan, this was something I was really curious and excited for. Primarily because while I love Todd's solo work, I was interested to see how he operates in a band setting once more. The fact that this album features Matt Tall and Jesse Vest made it that much more exciting to me. And while I wasn't familiar with Donald Carpenter of Submersed, there's a bit of a six-party connection there. I'm a big fan of Mark Tremonti, as you know, since I mentioned Creed in pretty much every single video. And Tremonti's solo band features two former members of Submersed. So to some degree, I kind of have been familiarized with Submersed, just not Donald Carpenter before. In either case, as someone who has a very distinct voice separate from the baritone of Travis Meeks and Hugo Ferreira, I knew Blisskrieg was going to offer something new to the table in a way that Days of the New and Tantric didn't. So without further ado, let's explore what it is that Blisskrieg brought to the table for 2021. And here we go. So right from the first single, this album really caught me by surprise, primarily because the first song, except for the vocal melodies, doesn't really have anything reminiscent of Days of the New or Tantric. And that's a common thing we'll see in the review for this album. While this does feature the original lineups of Days of the New and Tantric minus the singer, it does embark on an entirely new sound distinct from those bands. So as I've mentioned in my videos, which if you haven't seen, you should check out. And if you have seen them, here's to you. Days of the New and Tantric, one thing I really loved about both bands is they borrowed heavily from Alice in Chains. Basically that dual melodies between a singer and a guitarist was ever present in both bands, and both bands heavily rely on acoustic elements. Now, a lot of Alice in Chains fans dismissed both Days of the New and Tantric as by-the-numbers rock bands aping Alice in Chains. And I think that's really unfair for a multitude of reasons. One of which, because Days of the New and Tantric don't really sound like Alice in Chains aside from those basic elements I mentioned earlier. And two, if you really loved Alice in Chains as much as you say you do, then you should get a lot out of both Days of the New and Tantric, being as they're very reminiscent of Alice in Chains. Look at it this way. Let's say the first woman you ever fall in love with is a redheaded chick with colored eyes. She's the first girl you've ever loved, maybe in college. You guys get together, you have a pretty fulfilling, meaningful relationship, and then you guys break up one day. So once you get out into the work field, you meet another redheaded woman with colored eyes. Are those women the same? No, they're not. They have similar traits though, being the red hair and the colored eyes, but they're not the same individual. That's pretty much the same thing that's going on with Days of the New, Tantric, and Alice in Chains. Alice in Chains showed me the things I like about rock bands. They showed me those traits that I tend to lean towards when I listen to rock music. And Days of the New and Tantric also embody those traits. It's not so much ripping off, it's just a similarity. And you know what? I will admit, Todd Whitener does borrow a lot from Alice in Chains, but at no point does it feel derivative. At no point does it feel redundant or as if he's just ripping off the band over and over again. And in many ways, Blisskrieg is kind of a testament to the members of these bands that they can make music that does not sound like Alice in Chains. So as stated earlier, Inside Me is really the only song that embodies those Alice in Chains melodies I've come to expect from the band previously in Tantric. But that's really the only instance you see of that on this album. The rest of the album is really the guys playing around Donald Carpenter's vocals, which is good and bad for its own reasons. It's good because they're not relying as heavily on Todd Whitener this time to just carry the album, as he did previously in Tantric. I've always said Todd Whitener was the best aspect of Tantric, at least in terms of the singing. I didn't even think Hugo Ferreira was the best singer in his own band. So by basically lessening Todd's vocals on this album, they're really highlighting how much Donald Carpenter's voice stands on its own. I will admit, I do think Inside Me was the worst lead single. I think it's actually the worst song on the album. They really should have let off with Parasitic, primarily because Parasitic embodies everything that makes this lineup historic. So Donald Carpenter delivers a very catchy and awesome vocal melody throughout the entire song, with some lyrics that might be referencing Travis Meeks the more I reflect on them. But at the same time, Todd Whitener does sing on this track. He has a singing part throughout the entire song. However, his singing is more of a backup to Donald Carpenter as opposed to a co-lead singing thing. I personally would have been fine with either, but it does show how this band is trying to do different things. They're trying to highlight the singer more and show the world that they're more of a balanced band this time, as opposed to just two guys doing all the vocals and the rhythm section carrying everything. Destination Unknown is easily the best song on the album. Some people compared it to Mad Seasons Above when it first came out, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. While musically it does kind of call back to Above, at the same time, what makes Destination Unknown so special is it shows the synergy between the three guys in Blisskrieg. Destination Unknown really shows off how much chemistry Todd Whitener, Jesse Vest, and Matt Tall have with each other, and how that chemistry has evolved as these guys have played together in every decade since their inception. If I had to pick one song that would demonstrate the musical chemistry that Todd Whitener, Jesse Vest, and Matt Tall share with each other, it would be Destination Unknown. And what makes that so interesting is it's not this bombastic, aggressive rock song. It's a very soothing, laid back, and contemplative song. And on top of this music is Donald Carpenter's lyrics, which really show off where these guys are in their current lives, and might even be a retrospective in the careers that these men have had, being that these guys didn't reach the same success as a band like Alice in Chains. They kind of had their moment in the spotlight, things didn't work out, and now they are where they are. But in spite of that, fame or fortune isn't something needed to make good music, as these guys self-funded this album. They made it entirely on their own in Todd Whitener's studio and just put it out to the world because they felt like they had a statement to make. Wherever You Go is definitely the most Days of the New sounding song on the album. I would say if you're someone whose favorite album is the first Days of the New record, then this is probably the song that would speak to you the most, being that this sounds like it could be on that album, musically at least. Vocally, it is Blisskrieg basically giving themselves their own identity, showing how they're distinct from those bands. But musically, it does sound very much like the first Days of the New record, and that's something I immediately thought of when I heard it. It should be noted that this album is very reserved, and I would say it's even holding back in some parts. The heaviest songs on the album are probably Waiting and Take It Back. And while I enjoy both songs very much, both songs have great vocal melodies and guitar playing, at no point do either of these songs get as heavy as some of the material these guys made on Tantric, which isn't much of an issue for me personally, primarily because it is interesting to see these guys exploring an entirely new sound. It's neat to see them actually do something that is different from what I expect of them. They definitely subverted my expectations on this release, and I give them credit for that. But at the same time, being heavy really plays to their strengths. And being that these guys really aren't much younger than the dudes in Alter Bridge or Korn, there really is no excuse for them to be so apprehensive as they are. I understand that maybe you don't always carry that aggression into your later years, but the hard-hitting heavy rock that these guys used to make was something I've always come to expect from their sound. In fact, that's something that made that first Days of the New record so special, is it's entirely acoustic, but it goes harder than a lot of electric rock albums. In many ways, this album is basically Todd Whitener's solo work with a backing band surrounding it and a new singer in place of Todd Whitener, which is actually super cool. If I had to compare this band to anybody, it wouldn't be Alice in Chains, it would probably be Live, being that there is this rock aspect to the band's sound, but it's not as sinister as the past things these guys have done. There's no riff on this album that comes close to something like Chasing After, or After We Go, or Paranoid, or Inside Your Head. And that's not a bad thing either. This is the first album these guys have made where I can't say it has a direct resemblance to Alice in Chains. And the only song on this album that does bear any resemblance to Alice in Chains is my least favorite song on the album. The best song to exemplify this is probably Remedy, the title track. This is a very, very gentle song. I would say alongside She Cries is the most delicate song on the album, both in terms of music and lyricism. And Remedy is a very somber and peaceful track to conclude the album. I would say Remedy is also a very appropriate track given the year that preceded it. Well, we all know what happened in 2020. So in many ways, Remedy is, for lack of a better word, the remedy for any of the heartache or pain people suffered in the past year. Indirectly, the song reflects a lot of the bad moments that people endured, but it also provides a solution. It's a hopeful glare into the future, and it leaves me excited for what Blisskrieg is going to do next. So to conclude, Blisskrieg's Remedy is a very solid record. It's definitely the most unique album they've made between Yellow, After We Go, and self-titled for Tantric. And it's probably the only one that doesn't heavily rely on post-grunge. It's the second of 2 albums to not really utilize Todd Whitener, the first being Yellow by Days of the New. And I have to admit, I do have some, I take some issues with that. Primarily because I love Todd Whitener's voice and I'd like to hear more of it. And secondly, Todd Whitener is clearly the best looking guy in this band. I really need my Todd. I just feel like I'm going withdrawals without his presence here. I'm just kidding. So going back to the reference I made earlier regarding that woman, it's like running into that girl again after many years. You guys have broken up.
Your wife divorced you.
And you see that instead of her typical red hair, she's dyed her hair black. And she's a better person now. A lot of the issues she had when you knew her with her classic hair they've long dissipated. She seems to be in control of her life. Things are going pretty well. Maybe you guys could even get back together. And that would be sweet if you did. But at the same time, while you do appreciate her new black hair, it'd be sweet if her hair was red again. That's not necessarily saying I want you to do the same thing all the time, but more so, these traits that Todd Whitener, Jesse Vest, and Matt Tall have, they've been ever present in their past discography for a reason, and it would be nice to see them revisit that sound again also. I like the sound they have on Blisskrieg, but I would also like them to return to what established them and see them explore the sound that they were really passionate about at one point in time. If nothing else than just to experiment with it. And again, because I love hearing Todd Whitener's voice, I'd like to just hear more of it in a band setting. Donald Carpenter too, he kind of holds back on this record also. He sings everything fantastically. He's a great singer. But he used to be in 2 really heavy rock bands with I Empire and Submersed. So the dude can actually be very guttural when he wants to. Maybe he doesn't have as rich a baritone as Travis Meeks or Hugo Ferreira, but he can definitely hit those notes, and it would be cool to see him do that also. Overall, Blisskrieg's Remedy is a very good record. It's a record I enjoy very much, and it's one of my most played records of 2021. In many ways, I would say this record reflects a lot of the best moments for me in 2021. If I had to pick a soundtrack to the highlights of my year, it's probably this record. But I would like to see them go in a harder direction for the next record. Just for the sake of fulfilling my needs as a fan. I think that would be interesting to see them explore that avenue once more. Just to see how it works out. But at the same time, I also take solace knowing that if they're not really that into that sound anymore, what they're offering here is really good as well. If I had to say, aside from Inside Me, I think my least favorite thing about this album is the album cover. Now, as I understand it, Blisskrieg did a contest where they asked their fans to create the album cover for this record. And I'm not a really big fan of this one. It's very busy and it kind of has a lot going on to the point where I don't really know what to focus on. It's almost distracting to look at. Yeah, in the future, maybe you guys should check out the work by that Edward Ramirez guy. I thought his covers looked pretty good. I'm just saying. But Blisskrieg's Remedy is a fantastic album. I think it's one of the better records of 2021. It's probably my second favorite record of that year. If you love Alice in Chains, you're probably not going to get a lot out of this. But if you were a fan of Days of the New and Tantric in the past, I think you'll really appreciate how far they've come. Or if you're a fan of bands like Live, or maybe even some of Scott Stapp's solo work, I think this record will have something for you. So yeah, check it out. So that was my first album review of 2022. I guess depending on how well this video does, I may or may not do some more. But in either case, I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't checked out Blisskrieg, check them out. If you have, let me know what you think of them in the comments below. And as always, be calm, be cool, be collected, and I'll see you later.